The year was 2018, and the little town of Maplewood, nestled in the foothills of Oregon, was just starting to feel the crisp chill of autumn. The streets, lined with golden leaf trees, were the perfect backdrop for the picturesque suburban life that most of its residents worked so hard to maintain. One of those residents was Andrew Carter, a 40-year-old contractor who prided himself on building not just houses, but homes. Andrew wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. He had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that came from years of honest work and sticking to his principles. With his rugged, calloused hands and a smile that could light up a room, he was the embodiment of the dependable family man. But behind that smile was a man whose life was about to unravel. Andrew had built his life around his family. His wife, Melissa, and their two daughters, Sophie, 14, and Emma, 9. Melissa was everything Andrew thought he wanted. A partner, a confidant, and, at one point, his best friend. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying, her polished demeanor and warm laughter making her the center of attention wherever she went. But as Andrew would soon discover, appearances can be deceiving. Their marriage had started like a fairy tale. They'd met at a 4th of July barbecue when Andrew was just starting his construction business and Melissa was fresh out of college, working as a marketing assistant. She'd laughed at his terrible jokes, and he'd been captivated by her easy charm. They married 2 years later and bought a fixer-upper that Andrew spent countless weekends renovating. By the time Sophie and Emma came along, life seemed perfect, or at least good enough. But lately, Andrew had been feeling a shift. Melissa had become distant, her laughter quieter, her phone constantly glued to her hand. At first, he chalked it up to the stresses of life, work, kids, the monotony of routine. She'd recently taken a job at a luxury real estate agency in town, a move Andrew supported wholeheartedly. But with her new role came late nights, networking events, and weekends away at conferences. The once lively family dinners had turned into silent meals interrupted only by Melissa's buzzing phone. The first real crack in their picture-perfect life came on a chilly September evening. Andrew was in the garage, tinkering with an old bookshelf he was building for Sophie's room, when Emma wandered in, her face scrunched in confusion. "Daddy," she said, holding Melissa's tablet. "Why is Mommy kissing Uncle Jake in this picture?" Time seemed to stop. Uncle Jake, Jake Peterson, Melissa's business partner and Andrew's longtime friend. The man Andrew had trusted enough to let into his home, to share beers with after a long day. Surely Emma was mistaken. Kids misunderstood things all the time, right? Andrew took the tablet from her tiny hands, his heart pounding. The screen showed a photo of Melissa and Jake, laughing together at what appeared to be a restaurant. But it wasn't just the way they were sitting close or the intimate smiles they shared. It was the way Jake's hand rested on Melissa's thigh, an unmistakable gesture that spoke volumes. "Where did you find this, sweetheart?" Andrew asked, his voice tight. "On Mommy's work thingy," Emma replied, her innocence breaking his heart. "She said I could play games on it." Andrew forced a smile and sent Emma off to bed, promising he'd tuck her in soon. As the garage door closed behind her, the weight of what he'd seen hit him like a freight train. This couldn't be what it looked like. He needed answers. Melissa returned home later that night, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she breezed through the front door, radiating her usual effortless charm. But Andrew's world had already shifted, and he couldn't look at her the same way. "Late meeting?" he asked casually, setting aside the tablet he'd been scrutinizing for the last hour. "Yeah," she said with a tired smile, not meeting his eyes. "Jake and I had to go over some contracts for the Rutherfords. They're so picky about the details." It was a simple lie, wrapped in the guise of everyday work obligations. But to Andrew, it was a dagger. He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he decided to gather more information. If Melissa was lying about Jake, what else was she hiding? And how deep did this go? Andrew wasn't a tech-savvy guy, but years of managing construction sites had taught him the value of having a reliable network. He reached out to his cousin, Nate, a cybersecurity consultant with a knack for uncovering secrets. Over a few beers the next night, Andrew explained his suspicions, omitting Emma's role in the discovery. Nate didn't judge, but his brow furrowed as he listened. "You sure you want to go down this road?" he asked, his voice low. "Once you see what's there, you can't unsee it." Andrew didn't hesitate. "I need the truth, Nate. For my kids. For myself." Within days, Nate delivered a flash drive filled with information Andrew couldn't have imagined in his worst nightmares. Emails, text messages, call logs, it was all there, meticulously cataloged. The evidence painted a clear picture. Melissa and Jake had been carrying on their affair for over a year, using work as a convenient cover. Romantic dinners, out-of-town conferences, and even a weekend getaway to Napa on Andrew's dime. But the betrayal didn't stop there. Among the files was a draft business plan Jake had written, outlining a proposal to merge his real estate agency with another firm. The kicker? Melissa was listed as his co-partner in the venture, a move that would require her to divorce Andrew to avoid any conflicts of interest. Andrew's world crumbled as he realized the extent of their deceit. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about dismantling the life he'd worked so hard to build. For weeks, Andrew kept the information to himself, quietly observing Melissa's behavior. He watched as she played the doting wife and mother, pretending their life was still intact. He even endured an excruciating dinner with Jake and his wife, Lydia, who seemed blissfully unaware of her husband's betrayal. But Andrew wasn't a man who reacted impulsively. He'd spent his life building things carefully, piece by piece, and he intended to dismantle this web of lies the same way. If you've made it this far, buckle up because things are about to get even more intense. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story as jaw-dropping as this one. Now, let's get back to the unraveling tale of Andrew, Melissa, and a betrayal so deep it could shatter even the strongest foundation. Andrew sat in his truck outside Maplewood Elementary, waiting for Emma's school day to end. His mind churned as he replayed the details from the files Nate had uncovered. Every transaction, every text, every photo. It all confirmed what Andrew feared most. The woman he had built his life around was plotting to tear it all apart. But Andrew wasn't just devastated, he was angry. And that anger was brewing into something cold and calculating. Instead of confronting Melissa immediately, Andrew decided to play the long game. He began paying closer attention to her actions, cataloging every suspicious move. She wasn't exactly subtle. There were unexplained client meetings, phone calls taken in hushed tones, and a noticeable uptick in her wardrobe budget. But Andrew had learned patience from years in construction. You don't demolish a building without understanding its structure first. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Melissa was in the living room, scrolling on her phone. Andrew sat down next to her, masking his turmoil with casual conversation. "How's work been?" he asked, glancing at her screen. Melissa quickly locked her phone, a move that didn't escape his notice. "Busy," she said with a tight smile. "Jake's been pushing us to close a big deal with the Petersons." Andrew nodded, feigning interest. "Jake's a good guy, huh? Always so driven." Her response was instant, almost defensive. "Yeah, he's committed." The tension between them was palpable, but Melissa didn't seem to notice the shift in Andrew's demeanor. He'd learned to hide his emotions well, an essential skill when managing both stubborn clients and fragile drywall. The real turning point came one Friday night. Melissa claimed she had a work dinner downtown, leaving Andrew home with the girls. After tucking them into bed, he pulled up the GPS tracking app Nate had installed on Melissa's phone. Something Andrew hadn't been proud of, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The app showed her location at a boutique hotel an hour away. Andrew's stomach churned, but instead of rushing out in a fit of rage, he made another call to Nate. Within minutes, Andrew had access to the hotel's guest registry, which confirmed what he already suspected. Melissa and Jake had checked in under pseudonyms, likely believing their flimsy cover would be enough. Andrew wasn't one to make scenes, so instead of confronting them, he gathered more evidence. Using Nate's advice, he hacked into the hotel's public Wi-Fi and accessed security camera footage. The video showed Melissa and Jake laughing together in the hotel bar, looking every bit the happy couple. They left hand in hand, disappearing into the elevator. When Melissa returned home the next morning, she had an air of casual confidence, as though nothing had happened. Andrew greeted her with his usual warmth, careful not to let his rage show. He knew the truth, but he wanted Melissa to think she still had the upper hand. "You're up early," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "Couldn't sleep," Andrew replied. "Been thinking about taking the girls on a camping trip next weekend. Get out of town for a bit. What do you think?" Melissa hesitated, clearly calculating whether this would interfere with her plans. "That sounds great. I'll see if I can shuffle some things around at work." Andrew smiled. Perfect. The hidden alliance. While Andrew played the part of the unsuspecting husband, he was working behind the scenes to assemble an army. His first call was to Lydia, Jake's wife, and the conversation was as awkward as it was enlightening. "Lydia, this is Andrew Carter," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I think we need to talk about Jake and Melissa." There was a pause, followed by a sigh that told Andrew Lydia already suspected something was amiss. "What about them?" she asked cautiously. Andrew laid everything on the table, the photos, the texts, the hotel registry. Lydia listened in stunned silence, and when he finished, her voice was laced with a mix of anger and relief. "I knew it," she said finally. "I've been noticing things too. Jake's been distant, always working late. I just didn't want to believe it." The two agreed to collaborate, pooling their evidence to confront their respective spouses when the time was right. Lydia had her own plans for Jake, but she was more than willing to help Andrew bring Melissa's lies crashing down. Tensions rise. As the weeks went on, Melissa continued her charade, blissfully unaware that her husband was 2 steps ahead. Andrew, meanwhile, began making subtle changes to their household finances. He transferred money from their joint accounts into a secure fund under his name, ensuring that Melissa wouldn't have access when the truth finally came out. He also met with his lawyer, preparing for the inevitable fallout. The tension reached a boiling point during Sophie's school play. Melissa arrived late, her hair and makeup suspiciously perfect for someone who claimed to have rushed from work. Jake was also in the audience, sitting far enough away to avoid suspicion but close enough that Andrew noticed the brief glance they exchanged. After the play, as families mingled in the auditorium, Jake approached Andrew with his usual easy charm. "Andrew, great to see you. Sophie was fantastic up there." Andrew shook his hand, forcing a smile. "Thanks, Jake. Glad you could make it." As Jake turned to leave, Andrew's grip tightened, just for a moment. It was enough to make Jake pause, his smile faltering. Andrew leaned in, his voice low. "You've been busy, huh? Business dinners, late-night meetings. Sounds exhausting." Jake's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly recovered, laughing nervously. "Yeah, you know how it is. The real estate market never sleeps." Andrew released his hand, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Right. Well, take care, Jake. Wouldn't want you burning out." It was a small moment, but it gave Andrew a flicker of satisfaction. He wasn't just a passive victim in this story. He was the one laying the groundwork for what was to come. A subtle reminder. Andrew's growing resolve didn't go unnoticed by Sophie and Emma. Though he tried to shield them from the worst of it, they picked up on the strained atmosphere at home. Sophie, ever the observant teenager, cornered him one evening while he was fixing the leaky kitchen faucet. "Dad," she said quietly, "is everything okay with you and Mom?" Andrew hesitated, his heart breaking at the worry in her eyes. "Things are a little complicated right now, sophomore. But no matter what happens, you and Emma are my top priority. Always." Her nod was small but resolute, and Andrew realized then that he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his daughters, for the values he wanted to pass down to them. As Andrew prepared to execute his plan, the pieces were falling into place. The evidence was airtight, the alliances were forged, and the stage was set for the confrontation that would expose everything. But would Melissa finally come clean, or would she double down on her deception? Stay tuned, because the twists and turns ahead will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up with the next chapter of this gripping story. Welcome back, everyone. If you've been following this story so far, You know things are heating up for Andrew and Melissa. The stakes are higher than ever, and the tension is palpable as Andrew edges closer to exposing the truth. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any updates. Now, let's unravel the next chapter of this intense saga. The confrontation looms. Andrew spent the week preparing meticulously. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, every financial maneuver locked into place. It wasn't just about confronting Melissa, it was about making sure there was no way she could twist the narrative in her favor. He didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. What Andrew wanted was justice and, more importantly, closure. Melissa, meanwhile, continued her facade of a dutiful wife and mother, seemingly oblivious to Andrew's quiet detachment. But Andrew noticed the small cracks in her composure, the way she flinched whenever her phone buzzed, or how her stories about work became increasingly convoluted. It was as if she sensed the walls closing in, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The tipping point came during a family dinner at a local Italian restaurant. Melissa had suggested it, likely as an attempt to maintain the illusion of a happy family. But halfway through the meal, Andrew caught her glancing at her phone under the table. Her smile faltered when she noticed him watching. "Something important?" Andrew asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Melissa fumbled, locking her phone and setting it down. "Oh, just a work thing." Sophie chimed in, her teenage bluntness cutting through the tension. "Mom, you're always working. Can't it wait?" Melissa forced a laugh. "Of course, sweetie. You're absolutely right." Andrew held her gaze for a moment longer before turning back to his plate, his silence speaking volumes. Melissa looked away, clearly unsettled. Lydia's role. Behind the scenes, Andrew and Lydia were in constant communication. Their partnership had grown into a mutual support system as they worked to untangle the web of lies their spouses had spun. Lydia, it turned out, was just as methodical as Andrew, and her keen attention to detail uncovered even more damning evidence. One evening, Lydia called Andrew with an update. "I've been going through Jake's work emails. Turns out he's been using the company credit card for more than just dinners and hotels." Andrew leaned forward in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. "What did you find?" "Luxury gifts," Lydia said, her voice laced with disgust. "Jewelry, handbags, he even bought plane tickets to Paris. And guess whose name is on the itinerary alongside his?" Andrew's grip on the phone tightened. "Melissa. Bingo. They were planning to go next month. First class, of course." The revelation fueled Andrew's determination. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about ensuring that Melissa and Jake couldn't continue their charade unchecked. Setting the trap. The camping trip Andrew had mentioned to Melissa wasn't just a casual family outing. It was part of his plan. He deliberately chose a location without cell service, knowing it would force Melissa to disconnect from Jake for the weekend. It was a chance to gauge her reactions and push her into a corner. The trip itself started innocently enough. Andrew, Sophie, and Emma worked together to set up their campsite, while Melissa busied herself taking selfies by the lake. She posted them to social media with captions about family bonding, which Andrew found almost laughable. That night, as the girls roasted marshmallows by the fire, Andrew brought up the topic of trust. It was subtle at first, a story about a friend whose marriage fell apart due to dishonesty. But as the conversation went on, his words became more pointed. "It's amazing," Andrew said, staring into the flames. "How people can smile to your face while stabbing you in the back." Melissa froze, her marshmallow slipping off the stick and into the fire. "What's that supposed to mean?" Andrew shrugged, his tone even. "Just an observation." Sophie, sensing the tension, quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Melissa spent the rest of the evening on edge, her cheerful demeanor replaced by something more guarded. The breaking point. When they returned home, Andrew decided it was time to act. He scheduled a dinner with Melissa, framing it as an opportunity to reconnect. But his real goal was to confront her with the evidence he had gathered. Melissa arrived at the restaurant dressed to impress, her smile radiant but hollow. Andrew could see through the act. It was the same mask she wore for everyone else. He played along, engaging in light conversation as they sipped their wine. Then, as the waiter cleared their plates, Andrew pulled out his phone. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his voice calm but firm. Melissa's smile faltered. "What is it?" Andrew slid his phone across the table, the screen displaying a photo of her and Jake at the hotel bar. Her face went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Andrew leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is the truth." Melissa's defenses crumbled. She stammered, trying to explain, but Andrew cut her off. "I've seen the texts, the emails, the photos. I know everything, Melissa. The late nights, the lies, the trips with Jake. It's all out in the open now." Tears welled in Melissa's eyes, but Andrew felt no sympathy. Her betrayal had been calculated, and now she was reaping the consequences. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It got out of control." Andrew's laugh was bitter. "Out of control? You made choices, Melissa, deliberate choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. The fallout, the confrontation was only the beginning." Over the next few weeks, Andrew and Lydia worked together to dismantle the lives Melissa and Jake had built on lies. They presented their evidence to their respective lawyers, ensuring that the divorce proceedings would leave no room for manipulation. Melissa's social media presence began to fade as the truth of her actions came to light. Friends and family who had once admired her picture-perfect life now viewed her with suspicion and judgment. Jake faced similar repercussions. His professional reputation in shambles after Lydia exposed his misuse of company funds. But the fallout wasn't just external, it was deeply personal. Sophie and Emma struggled to process the changes in their family dynamic. Their once stable world turned upside down. Andrew did his best to shield them from the worst of it, but he knew they would carry the scars of this betrayal for years to come. A new beginning. As the dust settled, Andrew found himself rebuilding. Not just his life, but his sense of identity. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the tangible results of his labor. He also focused on his daughters, ensuring that they felt loved and supported despite the chaos. One evening, as Andrew and the girls were watching a movie, Sophie turned to him with a hesitant smile. "You know, Dad, I think we're going to be okay." Andrew hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. "We're not just going to be okay, sophomore. We're going to be stronger." This story is far from over, but as we approach the climax, one thing is clear. Andrew is determined to rise above the betrayal and build a future he and his daughters can be proud of. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the final pieces of this puzzle fall into place. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Welcome back to the story, everyone. The tension has been building, and now we're on the edge of our seats as the truth starts to unravel. Andrew has been methodical in his approach, but the pressure is mounting, and the stakes have never been higher. Before we dive into the next chapter, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. Let's get started. Unveiling the master plan. With the evidence stacked against Melissa and Jake, Andrew shifted his focus to the final phase of his plan. He wasn't just interested in holding them accountable. He wanted to ensure they couldn't continue their deception. Every move Andrew made was deliberate, calculated, and designed to expose the truth in a way that left no room for denial. Andrew contacted Lydia to finalize the timing. "This isn't just about revenge," he told her. "It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." Lydia agreed. "Jake's been living off lies for years. It's time the people around him see him for who he really is." Together, they coordinated their approach, ensuring that every piece of evidence would be presented at the right time and to the right people. It was a delicate balancing act, but Andrew's determination and Lydia's attention to detail made them an unstoppable team. The first domino falls. The first public confrontation happened at a charity gala Melissa and Jake had planned to attend. The event was high-profile, filled with influential people who admired Melissa's polished image and Jake's supposed charm. But Andrew and Lydia had other plans. As Melissa mingled, laughing and chatting with her circle of friends, Andrew approached with quiet confidence. He handed her a small envelope and said, "You might want to take a look at this." Melissa's smile faltered as she opened the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of an email exchange between her and Jake, one that left no doubt about their affair. Her face turned ashen, and she quickly stuffed the papers into her purse. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "Just leveling the playing field," Andrew replied, his tone calm but firm. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Melissa. It might be your last in this crowd." Meanwhile, Lydia approached Jake, who was standing near the bar, his usual confidence on full display. She handed him a folder filled with evidence of his misuse of company funds, his affair with Melissa, and even his fraudulent financial practices. "This is going to end one of two ways," Lydia said. "You can come clean, or I'll make sure every single person here knows exactly who you are." Jake's cocky smile disappeared, replaced by a mix of panic and anger. "You don't have the guts." Lydia's voice didn't waver. "Try me." The confrontation escalates. As the night went on, the tension between Andrew, Melissa, Lydia, and Jake became impossible to ignore. Guests began to notice the hushed arguments, the tense body language, and the way Melissa and Jake seemed to avoid eye contact with anyone who might ask questions. Finally, Andrew decided it was time to drop the pretense. He stepped onto the stage where a band had just finished playing and tapped the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but firm, "I'd like to take a moment to share something important." Melissa's eyes widened in panic, and she started toward the stage, but Lydia intercepted her, blocking her path. Andrew continued, holding up a stack of papers. "For years, I've supported this community, this event, and my family with everything I have. But tonight, I've learned that not everyone values honesty and integrity the way I do." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "These documents," Andrew said, holding them higher, "contain proof of betrayal, personal and professional. And while I won't go into details here, I want to make one thing clear. The people you think you know may not be who they claim to be." He set the papers down on the podium and stepped away, leaving the crowd buzzing with speculation. Melissa and Jake stood frozen, their carefully crafted images crumbling before their eyes. The fallout begins. The days following the gala were chaotic. Melissa's social media accounts, once filled with pictures of her glamorous life, were flooded with comments and questions about Andrew's speech. Friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves, wary of being associated with the growing scandal. Jake faced even more immediate consequences. Lydia had taken the evidence to his company's board of directors, and within 24 hours, he was suspended pending a full investigation. The financial misconduct she uncovered was enough to not only ruin his career but also potentially lead to criminal charges. Melissa, desperate to salvage her reputation, tried reaching out to Andrew. She left voicemail after voicemail, her tone shifting from angry to pleading to tearful. "Andrew, please," one message said. "We can work this out. Think of the girls. Don't let this ruin everything." But Andrew didn't respond. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. A heartfelt conversation. Amid the chaos, Andrew took time to sit down with Sophie and Emma to explain what was happening. He knew they deserved the truth, but he also wanted to protect them from the worst of it. "I'm sorry you have to go through this," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I need you to know that none of this is your fault. Your mom and I made choices, some good, some bad, and now we're dealing with the consequences." Sophie, always the more outspoken of the two, looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Is this because of the fight at dinner? Are you getting a divorce?" Andrew hesitated before answering. "Yes, we are. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. Both of us want what's best for you, even if we're not together anymore." Emma, usually quiet, surprised him by speaking up. "We just want you to be happy, Dad. You deserve that." Her words hit Andrew like a ton of bricks. He pulled them both into a hug, vowing to himself that he would rebuild their lives stronger than ever. The turning point, With Melissa's betrayal exposed and Jake's career in tatters, Andrew and Lydia found themselves at a crossroads. They had achieved their goal of holding their spouses accountable, but the emotional toll was undeniable. One evening, Lydia called Andrew to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Andrew sighed, his exhaustion evident. "It's been a lot, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. How about you?" "Same," Lydia replied. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to what comes next. A fresh start." Their conversation ended with a mutual sense of closure. They had faced their darkest moments and come out the other side, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As the story builds toward its climax, the stakes have never been higher. Will Andrew find peace and rebuild his life? What consequences will Melissa and Jake face as their lies unravel? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive into the emotional and dramatic resolution of this tale. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. Welcome back, everyone. This is where things get even more intense. We're diving into the most dramatic moments of the story, the point where secrets unravel, decisions are made, and lives are changed forever. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on more stories just like this. Let's jump right in. The Reckoning. Melissa paced the living room, her carefully curated calm unraveling. The fallout from Andrew's revelation at the gala had been immediate and brutal. Invitations to social events dried up overnight, and her phone, once constantly buzzing with messages, now felt eerily silent. The whispers had reached everyone in her circle, and the once perfect image she had cultivated was now shattered. Desperation set in. Melissa tried reaching out to close friends, only to be met with polite excuses or outright avoidance. Even her closest confidant, Ava, offered nothing but clipped responses. "Melissa," Ava said during a strained phone call, "I can't be involved in this. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." That line stung more than Melissa expected. She realized too late that the life she built on appearances and connections was crumbling, and Andrew wasn't lifting a finger to stop it. Jake's collapse. Meanwhile, Jake faced his own unraveling. His suspension had turned into a full-blown investigation, and every corner of his professional life was under scrutiny. The board had uncovered not just his financial misconduct, but also damning evidence of personal indiscretions tied to company funds. In his now empty office, Jake received a call from his lawyer. "They're pushing for a full audit, Jake," the lawyer said bluntly. "If this goes to court, you're looking at more than just losing your job. You could be facing prison time." Jake slammed the phone down, his frustration boiling over. His charm, which had once been enough to talk his way out of anything, was useless now. The walls were closing in, and the realization that he'd been outmaneuvered hit hard. He thought back to his last conversation with Lydia, the anger in her eyes as she laid out her plans to expose him. He had underestimated her and Andrew. Now he was paying the price. Andrew's next move. Andrew, on the other hand, was calm and focused. With Melissa and Jake's world falling apart, he turned his attention to securing his daughter's futures. He met with Sophie and Emma's school administrators to ensure that the disruption in their lives would be minimal. At the same time, he prepared for the legal battle ahead. His lawyer, Karen, was a no-nonsense professional who had seen cases like this before. She admired Andrew's restraint and clarity. "You've done everything right," she told him during one of their meetings. "The evidence is solid, and you've protected your assets. This case will go in your favor." Andrew nodded, his expression resolute. "This isn't just about winning in court," he said. "It's about setting an example for my daughters. I want them to know that integrity matters, even when it's hard." An unexpected turn. Just when Andrew thought the pieces were falling into place, an unexpected twist threw him off balance. Sophie and Emma, who had been struggling to process the turmoil, decided to confront their mother. "Why, Mom?" Sophie asked one evening, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why would you do this to Dad? To us?" Melissa, who had been sitting in the kitchen nursing a glass of wine, looked up in shock. She hadn't expected her daughters to take such a direct approach. I made mistakes, Melissa stammered. But everything I did for this family. Emma, usually quiet and reserved, spoke up with surprising conviction. That's not true. Dad's the one who kept this family together. You just wanted something else. And you didn't care who it hurt. Melissa's facade cracked. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. Your father isn't perfect. He's distant, always busy with work. I was lonely. That's not an excuse, Sophie said firmly. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to him. You should have tried to fix it instead of this. The confrontation left Melissa shaken. For the first time, she couldn't hide behind her excuses. The reality of what she had done and the impact it had on her daughters was impossible to ignore. The climactic showdown. The pivotal moment came during a family mediation session arranged by the court. Andrew, Melissa, and their lawyers sat across from each other at a long conference table, with Sophie and Emma observing from the sidelines. Karen laid out Andrew's case with precision. She presented evidence of Melissa's affair, financial misconduct, and attempts to manipulate their daughters. Melissa's lawyer struggled to counter the overwhelming documentation Andrew had gathered. When it was Melissa's turn to speak, she broke down in tears. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I made mistakes, but I still love my family. Andrew's response was measured but firm. Love isn't just a feeling, Melissa. It's actions, choices, and the choices you made hurt all of us. I'm willing to move forward, but only if we're honest about what happened and what needs to change. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like Melissa might finally take responsibility for her actions. But instead, she doubled down, blaming Andrew for being emotionally unavailable and overly focused on his career. The mediator stepped in, trying to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. It was clear to everyone in the room that reconciliation was off the table. Lydia's triumph. While Andrew focused on his family, Lydia had her own victory to celebrate. With Jake's professional downfall complete, she finalized their divorce and took control of her share of the marital assets. Unlike Melissa, Lydia didn't cling to excuses or play the victim. She used the opportunity to rebuild her life on her own terms. One evening, she called Andrew to share the news. It's over, she said, her voice filled with relief. The divorce is finalized, and I've started a new job. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. Andrew congratulated her, genuinely happy for her progress. You've earned this, Lydia. You didn't just survive, you thrived. Their conversation ended on a positive note, with both of them looking forward to brighter days ahead. A family fractured but healing. As the story builds toward its resolution, the fallout continues to ripple through everyone's lives. Andrew and his daughters begin to rebuild their relationship, finding strength in their shared experiences. Melissa, now isolated and facing the consequences of her choices, struggles to find a way forward. But the most important lesson of all is clear. Integrity and honesty are the foundation of any meaningful relationship. Without them, even the most polished facade will eventually crumble. As we approach the final chapter of the story, the question remains: will Melissa find redemption, or will her choices define her future? And how will Andrew and his daughters continue to heal and move on? Stay tuned for the conclusion of this gripping tale. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Welcome back to the next chapter of this emotionally charged story. We're now approaching the boiling point, where every decision, every betrayal, and every moment of redemption comes crashing together. This is the part of the story where the stakes couldn't be higher, and the characters are pushed to their limits. Before we dive in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the final twists of this unforgettable journey. Let's continue. The unraveling of Melissa. Melissa's carefully curated world was unraveling faster than she could salvage it. The mediation session had left her shaken, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her choices. Yet, denial still clung to her like a safety net, convincing her that there was a way to regain control. She began crafting a narrative to win back public sympathy, posting pictures of her daughters and nostalgic moments from their families past on social media. But the response was far from what she had hoped. Comments flooded in, questioning her motives, calling her out for trying to rewrite history. Friends who once showered her posts with likes and hearts were now silent. Her attempts to reach out to Andrew were equally futile. His responses were curt and focused solely on co-parenting logistics. The warmth, the understanding that had defined their relationship for years, was gone. One night, as she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, she scrolled through old family photos on her phone. The memories hit her like a tidal wave. Vacations, birthdays, quiet nights at home. Each image was a reminder of the life she had destroyed. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Sophie and Emma's struggle. While Melissa wrestled with her guilt, Sophie and Emma found themselves caught in the emotional crossfire. Sophie, the elder of the two, tried to shield her younger sister from the fallout, but the strain was evident. Emma, once bubbly and full of life, had become withdrawn. She struggled to focus in school and avoided spending time with friends. One evening, Sophie found her in their shared room, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Emma," Sophie said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think Mom even cares about us anymore? Or is she too busy trying to fix her image?" Sophie's heart broke at the question. She wanted to assure her sister that their mother loved them, but the words felt hollow. Instead, she said, "Whatever happens, we have each other, and we have Dad. He'll make sure we're okay." It was a promise Sophie wasn't entirely sure she could keep, but it was enough to pull Emma into a hug, giving them both a moment of solace in an otherwise chaotic world. Jake's desperation. As Melissa's life spiraled, Jake's situation grew increasingly dire. His financial accounts were frozen, his reputation in shambles, and his once loyal allies had abandoned him. Alone in a dingy motel room, he drank cheap whiskey while staring at the glowing screen of his phone. He had tried calling Melissa multiple times, but she hadn't answered. Part of him had hoped she would still be his ally, that they could weather the storm together. But as the days passed, it became clear that she was focused on saving herself. Desperation led Jake to a rash decision. He showed up unannounced at Andrew's office, demanding to speak with him. The receptionist hesitated but ultimately called security when Jake's behavior grew erratic. Before he was escorted out, Jake shouted, "You think you've won, Andrew? This isn't over. You're not as untouchable as you think." Andrew, watching from behind the glass wall of his office, remained calm. Jake's outburst was just another confirmation that his carefully laid plans were working. Andrew's steady resolve. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Andrew remained a pillar of strength for his daughters. He knew they were struggling, and he made it his mission to provide stability in their lives. Family dinners became a nightly tradition, filled with laughter and stories to remind Sophie and Emma that they were still a family, even if fractured. One evening, Andrew received a surprise visit from Lydia. She had come to thank him for the role he played in her own journey of rebuilding her life. "Andrew," Lydia began, handing him a small gift bag, "I wanted to give you this. It's nothing big, just a token of my appreciation." Inside was a leather-bound journal with the words "New Beginnings" embossed on the cover. Andrew smiled, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I did," Lydia replied, "because you didn't just help me expose Jake. You reminded me that I'm capable of more than I ever gave myself credit for." Their conversation was brief but meaningful, a reminder to Andrew that even in the darkest times, there was room for connection and growth. The turning point. The climax came on a Friday evening when Melissa showed up at Andrew's house unannounced. She looked disheveled, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. Andrew hesitated before letting her in, his instincts telling him that this wasn't just another attempt at reconciliation. "I need to talk to you," Melissa said, her voice cracking. "About everything." They sat in the living room, the tension between them palpable. Melissa began to apologize, but Andrew stopped her. "Melissa," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "apologies don't fix this. What you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a series of choices that hurt me, hurt our daughters." "I know," Melissa whispered, tears streaming down her face, "and I'll regret those choices for the rest of my life. But I want to make things right. I want to be a better mother. For Sophie and Emma." Andrew studied her, searching for sincerity in her words. "If you're serious about that, it starts with taking responsibility. Not just to me, but to them. They deserve the truth." Melissa nodded, though the prospect of confessing her wrongs to their daughters terrified her. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that, even if she couldn't fix everything, she could at least start to rebuild what she had broken. Building toward the peak. The emotional stakes were higher than ever. Melissa's decision to take responsibility marked a turning point, but the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. Andrew, while willing to support her efforts to be a better mother, made it clear that their marriage was over. Sophie and Emma, though still hurt, began to see glimpses of the mother they once knew. It wasn't an easy process, but small steps were being made toward healing. Meanwhile, Jake's downward spiral reached its inevitable conclusion. His mounting legal troubles left him with no choice but to accept a plea deal, ending his career and leaving him financially ruined. As the pieces fell into place, one thing became clear. The climax was approaching, and the decisions each character made now would define their futures. As we prepare for the final act, stay tuned to see how this emotional roller coaster concludes. Will Melissa redeem herself in the eyes of her daughters? Will Andrew find peace after the storm? And what lessons will Sophie and Emma carry forward from this tumultuous chapter in their lives? Don't miss the conclusion of this gripping story. Like, share, and subscribe to follow the journey to the very end. Welcome back, and thank you for sticking with us as we navigate this emotional and dramatic tale. The end is here, and it's time to bring this story full circle. Will the characters find peace, or will their decisions continue to haunt them? Let's dive into the conclusion, where the past meets the present and the future is rewritten. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you've been enjoying this journey. Now let's see how it all wraps up. Melissa's moment of truth. Melissa stood in the cozy family room, her heart pounding as Sophie and Emma sat before her. Andrew had stepped out to give them privacy, but his absence only magnified the weight of the moment. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Girls, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Sophie crossed her arms, her expression guarded. Emma's wide eyes reflected both confusion and fear. Melissa continued, her voice cracking. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes that hurt our family. I was selfish and I let you both down." Emma's voice was a whisper. "Why, Mom? Why did you do it?" Melissa wiped a tear from her cheek. "I wish I had a simple answer, but the truth is, I lost sight of what mattered. I thought I needed something more, something better, but I didn't see how much I already had. And I didn't see how much I was risking." Sophie finally spoke, her tone sharp. "So what happens now? Are you just saying sorry and expecting everything to go back to normal?" "No," Melissa said firmly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just want a chance to earn back your trust. I want to be the mother you deserve." There was a long silence. Then Emma, teary-eyed, stood and hugged her mother tightly. Sophie hesitated but eventually joined them, her embrace less emotional but no less meaningful. This was not the end of their pain, but it was the beginning of their healing. Andrew finds his peace. Meanwhile, Andrew was walking through a park nearby, reflecting on the events of the past year. For so long, he had been focused on protecting his daughters and shielding them from the fallout of Melissa's actions. Now, he realized that it was time to focus on himself. The park was alive with laughter and the sounds of children playing. It reminded him of when Sophie and Emma were little, running around without a care in the world. Those memories brought a bittersweet smile to his face. As he sat on a bench, his phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "You've done an amazing job with Sophie and Emma. They're lucky to have you." He stared at the screen, then replied, "Thanks, Lydia. That means a lot." It was a simple exchange, but it sparked something in Andrew, a realization that he wasn't alone in this new chapter of his life. The future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities. Sophie's strength and Emma's resilience. Over the following months, Sophie and Emma began to adjust to their new reality. Sophie, ever the protector, stepped into a leadership role within the family. She took on more responsibilities at home, helping her dad with household chores and making sure Emma stayed focused on school. Emma, inspired by her sister's strength, started to come out of her shell. She joined the drama club at school, finding a new outlet for her emotions. Performing on stage allowed her to process her feelings in a way she hadn't been able to before. One night, after a school play, Andrew and Sophie watched as Emma took her final bow. The audience erupted into applause, and Emma's face lit up with a smile they hadn't seen in months. Andrew leaned over to Sophie. "She's going to be okay, and so are we." Sophie nodded, a quiet but firm determination in her eyes. "Yeah, Dad, we are." Jake's final fall. As the Taylors began to rebuild, Jake's life continued to crumble. His plea deal had kept him out of prison, but it left him financially ruined. The luxury lifestyle he once flaunted was now a distant memory. He moved to a small town far away, hoping to start over. But without his charm or status to shield him, he struggled to find work. The people he once relied on had disappeared, unwilling to be associated with his scandal. One evening, sitting alone in a dingy apartment, Jake scrolled through his social media. He saw pictures of Andrew with Sophie and Emma, smiling and happy. For a brief moment he considered reaching out, but he knew it was too late. The bridges he had burned were beyond repair. His downfall was complete, and unlike the Taylors, there was no one left to help him pick up the pieces. The new beginning. By the one-year mark, life for the Taylors had taken on a new rhythm. Melissa, true to her word, worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationship with Sophie and Emma. She attended therapy and began volunteering at a local shelter, determined to turn her mistakes into lessons. Andrew, too, found a sense of renewal. He started dating Lydia, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't a whirlwind romance but a steady and genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and understanding. One sunny afternoon, the family gathered for a picnic at the park. Melissa was there, too, not as a wife but as a mother trying to reconnect. For the first time in a long time, there was laughter, real, unforced laughter. Sophie rolled her eyes but smiled as Andrew and Emma attempted to fly a kite. Melissa sat on a blanket, watching the scene with a mix of gratitude and longing. She knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time she felt hopeful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Andrew looked around at his daughters, Melissa, and Lydia. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined them. They were stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Closing thoughts. And there you have it. A story of betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption. The Taylors' journey wasn't easy, but it was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a path forward. It's about choices, resilience, and the courage to rebuild. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey as much as we did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Click the next video to keep the inspiration going. Until next time, this concludes the story with a heartfelt and satisfying resolution, showing growth and the power of forgiveness without shying away from the consequences of poor decisions.